Hi and welcome to my Global Business Asia reflection assignment. So, we've just got back from our awesome trip that's covered 4 countries that include Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia and China. And this is just a little bit of my reflection upon our trip. So it's going to cover 3 major sections. So we're basically going to have a look at the entrepreneurial opportunities that we had or that we sort of identified along the trip. Some of the challenges that we faced and what we found confronting. Before diving straight in and sort of analysing the trip and sort of having a look back upon what we've learned, I just thought I'd start by basically outlining some of the things that I expected, or sort of just having a look at some of my initial thoughts on the trip, or what I sort of expected to encounter in the Asian markets. Naively, I think now looking back on it, I expected them to be quite similar to Australia due to the proximity of both the markets. I mean, they're both in that sort of southeastern hemisphere. So I expected there to be quite a lot of similarities, but I was actually quite surprised with just the vast sort of differences between them. So kicking off with my 3 major topics, I think I'll start with what I found initially challenging about the trip. So one of the first things I found actually quite difficult was the idea of keeping a journal. After doing a lot of travel over the last few years, keeping a journal had never occurred to me. It's never something that I really thought to do. What I generally do is when I travel is take a lot of pictures and upload them to Instagram sort of once every day, just to have a brief snapshot of that day. So taking this journal was quite an interesting sort of scenario. I did struggle and I wasn't able to do it on a daily basis, but it was a really good tool I found for me to actually stay focused upon the purpose of the trip and what we were actually trying to achieve. So it's definitely something I'll be doing in the future. Also staying focused on the reasons why we were there and what we were doing on the trip. So some of the group dynamics and the budget concerns were a constant issue sort of surrounding the trip that on reflection meant that some opportunities were probably not fully explored. So I definitely know for the next trip I'm definitely going to sort of try and brush over those bigger factors. Sort of another thing, I found it really hard or quite challenging to connect with the learning inside of the trip until we reached China. Found it really hard to connect with the large majority of the businesses due to the social aspect of their operations. The inability for the businesses to sort of operate self-sufficiently, let alone produce any sort of profit, meant I found it really difficult to sort of gain an understanding of where their business was coming from. Even Tohi, one of the most established enterprises we went to look at, it took 11 years for it to break even. I also found that the lack of the future goals and the plan for the business, coupled with the no profits, just made it really hard for me to take the businesses sort of seriously. I know that sounds quite harsh, but sort of the lack of foresight was just really hard for me to get my head around. Howitt 1990 states that innovative upstarts unseat established firms, and I think the lack of pressure for the entities to return a profit means that they don't actually run overly innovatively, from what I could see in terms of their operations. I think as well, however, I did enjoy my time with This Life Cambodia working on the Moto Doctor project. I think this was probably because we were fully immersed into the operations, and it really helped me understand how social enterprises work. I had struggled with understanding the social enterprise and still didn't fully understand how the social enterprises worked until the trip. So that was really good highlight for me. All in all, it was fantastic seeing all the social enterprises and understanding how they work, but has sort of cemented the fact that it's something that I probably wouldn't look into much further in the near future anyway, for myself personally. So the second part of this reflection is going to cover what I found confronting about the trip. So firstly, I have to say, sort of the level of corruption and censorship within the governments of the countries that we went to is actually quite phenomenal. Like you hear about these things, but you don't actually sort of really believe what you've been told, and you don't understand until you're actually inside the country's experiencing it firsthand. So I mean, like one example of this was in Phnom Penh Post, and talking to the CEO there, in regards to sort of how making really bold or rash political statements against the government can actually end quite badly. They were saying that one of their competitors was actually raided for making sort of bold statements out in the open against the current political party, and they were shut down, and certain people were actually arrested. As well as in Kung Fu Comedy in Shanghai. I know it wasn't sort of a sort of sanctioned business, but it was really interesting talking to him in regards to sort of how they have to send all their scripts off to get them checked by government officials. They can't mention anything in regards to sort of Taiwan and the ghost babies and organ harvesting and sort of the really harsh repercussions that come about that. So it's actually quite eye-opening in terms of if I was to ever sort of go into business in Asia, sort of, it's definitely something that it's not just a story, it's a very prevalent thing, and it's something that you have to manage and be sort of cautious of. I think another sort of little thing that I found a little bit confronting
Look at this little pupperino.
The difference a land border can make. Done quite a bit of travel, but funnily enough, never actually encountered a land border. It was just quite a surreal process for me, which is really quite interesting. But just the difference, even like coming from Cambodia into Vietnam and seeing the difference in wealth in the countries just over a single line essentially, and the stark contrast was really difficult for me to get my head around. And I know that's because of sort of the different political and economical landscapes of those countries, but it was just still something that I'd never experienced. And then I think finally on this point is how much more technologically advanced China is. I've been to quite a few what we call advanced Western economies this year. I've been to the UK twice, through quite a bit of Europe, Australia, USA, and Canada. And I thought these economies were quite technologically advanced and also quite technologically integrated. However, it just wasn't the case. It was insane going to China and just seeing everything that they do there in terms of what they do revolving around WeChat. So Shepherd 2009 states, with environments becoming more dynamic and increasingly competitive, organizations must become more entrepreneurial. And I actually think the Western cultures are playing catch up at the moment, which is something they haven't had to do before. But China has had such quick, rapid growth, and they've been able to build the technology in from their foundations, and it's so integrated into everyday life, that they're so much more ahead of the game than these other Western cultures. You look at sort of the UK and the USA, their wealth and their sort of economic gain came from a long time ago, and I think that they've started to sort of rest on their laurels and haven't actually integrated technology enough into sort of everyday society, and so it's going to be quite interesting over the coming years to sort of watch how these societies play catch up to an ever evolving Chinese market that's absolutely killing it at the moment. Also, sort of some can argue that the censorship within China, what was I saying? Yeah, it can be argued that some of the advancements are down to the censorship and a tool for the government to monitor the civilian activities. However, there are some very easy things that can be taken out of the Chinese market and integrated into external markets in the West. I mean, like WeChat Pay. You can just go to any of the vendors there and pay for anything that you want. I just thought that was really, really phenomenal. So I think that'll wrap that one up. Just a final little point. I think China has been able to integrate this stuff quite easily because of their quickly growing economy, and the amount of early adopters they have. So I mean, like just for an example, in 2004, Fogel G 2010 states that China has 236,000 millionaires, which was up to 12% from 2002. So I think like that sort of money also helps in terms of they can afford those more luxurious, expensive technological items. So now I'm just going to have a talk about sort of a reflection of the entrepreneurial opportunities that we had on our trip. So after taking the above into account, I still think the most rewarding part of the trip was the exposure to the completely foreign markets and the ideas that came from this exposure, especially sort of in terms of China. Going into the trip, I had quite naive views on the differences between the difference in markets between China, Vietnam, Cambodia. I thought they would be quite similar because they're obviously quite close, and yeah, boy was I wrong. It's really quite interesting just off the bat, like the more affluent sort of countries and areas that we're in, the less sort of number of street vendors there were and the more established sort of restaurants and shops there were. That was just one little comparison that I thought was actually quite interesting. It was really interesting as well seeing the differences of the markets like Cambodia and Thailand that rely quite heavily on tourism compared to economies like China, and to some extent an emerging Vietnam, where they're not so reliant. The tourism part of it is just an added bonus, and the sort of economies that they have in their goods and services provide most of their GDP. It just means that they have a completely different structure of doing things. In saying that, sort of many people in those tourist areas, like Cambodia, they spoke really good English, whereas you get to China and not many people spoke very good English. It was just really quite eye-opening. The businesses that we went to in China were phenomenal. I really feel like I connected with Mailman and Launchpad. I really enjoyed their talk. Being able to talk to them about sort of the scope of business within Shanghai, and what they offer and where they see the sort of markets going in the next 10, 20, 30 years was really helpful. And it actually gave me quite a few ideas sort of my own. And just finally, one of the things I found really sort of advantageous was the little business idea pitching thing that we had as a group on Aaron's last day. It was something small. I came into the experience with quite a bit of skepticism about it, just thinking that it was a bit of a fad, and I actually really found it really helpful in terms of actually sort of focusing more on fulfilling a need, and how to test prospective business ideas, rather than just coming up with an idea and going, oh yeah, that's fantastic. And finally, M. Elaine and J. Quigley Jr. 2013 state, in an environment that is hyperdynamic, it is crucial that organizations identify innovative competitive strategies. After the conclusion of the trip, I've taken the experiences, especially in China, and have looked at ways to integrate what I've learned from those into my own business ideas. And just to finish off, one of my ideas that I've actually come up with that I'm going to be pursuing over the next sort of year is basically an AI assisted stream. So you basically link all your social media networks. So you've got like your Facebook, your Instagram, your Snapchat, your Twitters. You use that, the AI sort of learns what you like and what you like to see, and then basically you just have one stream of things. So I basically took that after looking at China, and how they use WeChat, and trying to integrate that back into our everyday life. So thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation.